Hello people of YouTube, my name is Brad, this is my channel Adam and Orange, and welcome to an ICONX review of the Imperial Star Destroyer right here. This gorgeous and long-awaited model that we finally have to put together. I am going to take this video to talk about this build. This was a complicated, long, and very detailed model, and I don't mean that to sound negative in any way. I really enjoyed this build, though it was loaded with frustrations. All in all, this thing took me 6.5 hours to put together, which I believe is the same time as the ICONX logging truck and trailer, the Western Star. Just the truck part took me just as long to put that together as it did to put this together. Not the trailer, just the truck part. But anyway, point of comparison, the instructions for this thing are a whopping 16 pages long. There's two large ICONX sheets, but they also threw in a Metal Earth size sheet to be able to accommodate all of the parts on this particular model. And there is a lot to talk about in this review. I will start off by saying, though, in the end, I'll jump straight to the end. In the end, while this was difficult to build, I really love that I now have a sizable Star Destroyer model. I've already built the Star Destroyer once. It was one of the first models I ever built. It was the Metal Earth version. I'm going to grab that here in a little bit to compare. But this thing is just a nice size. I'd love for it to be a little bit bigger, but it is a very nice size. It is cram-packed with detail, and there is a lot to it. There is the finish on it. Let me comment on that for a moment. The finish on it is a little bit different than what I expected. If you've been following this channel for a while, you may have seen that originally they teased this months back, and it had kind of a brighter white color with some color detailing on it. But they redesigned the color, they redid the color, and now it has more of a kind of dull matte finish, which when I first opened it up, the sheets kind of looked like what you would get from, say, one of the copycat models off of AliExpress or eBay. But if you look closely, it's not that the metal is different. It's not that it's just not shiny or couldn't be shiny. It's that they've painted it with something to give it a more realistic appearance. So that it's, because the thing in space is not shining, it's not reflecting light. It does have a duller appearance, and if you look really closely, there's subtle differences. Almost what a lot of Star Trek fans with Star Trek starships would call Aztecing. And it just has very subtle color differences here and there. You can kind of see it on the bottom. It's a very spacey spaceship thing to do now. And it really works for this model. There's tons and tons of engraving detail of all the panels on this massive ship, because in reality, if this thing were real, this is a massive ship. And we've got guns all along it. We've got all kinds of panels and detailing and thrusters that actually have blue in the middle of them, adding depth to the model. We've got detail on the bottom, and this bay that's opened up, and the bubble thing with guns that I put on backwards, but whatever. There's just so much detail loaded into this model. Wow. Now, as I was putting this model together, I also had a friend that was putting it together at about the same time. You may have heard me mention the name CodeWookie. CodeWookie has a slightly larger collection than I do. Also received this model. He runs a blog where he also does reviews at MetalEarthBuilder.com, and we were communicating back and forth and some of the experiences we were having building this model. We did run into a few issues. Some of it were just our own misunderstanding. Some of it we think things could be improved on the instructions, and we did provide some feedback to Fascinations to let them know, hey, here's some things we ran into, what do you think about it? And tried to open up, or we did open up, we did open up some communication back and forth to where we kind of gave some feedback, and they gave us some feedback, and it was overall a very positive experience. I'm going to try and take some time to go over some of the things that I ran into to try and help you avoid these mistakes. And if you watch my build videos, I definitely go into every detail as I go along. Here I'm just going to kind of summarize, and some of the things I point out. One of the things I want to start with is not really a problem with the model, and I really didn't communicate this with Fascinations, but it was just something that you need to be aware of. You've got these large sections that you build that kind of stack on top, and they have side pieces, more than one, like one on each side, two side pieces that you can put on. It is possible, the way the tabs are evenly aligned on both sides, it is entirely possible to actually put those either backwards or upside down. And I think I did that at one point and had to switch apart. So when you're putting this stuff together, especially these upper sections with the side pieces, just pay extra attention to which side they go on, do the angles line up, because they do have angles where they fold in the middle. Are the holes lining up for parts later on? Does it make sense? Just double check yourself before you get too far, because one of the things that I ran into, it's just a matter of making sure you pay attention and not a problem with the build itself. But that's one of the things that I wanted to point out. There also is a lot of little tiny folds to bend over and shape and bend and bend and bend, and it kind of pushed the limits of the tools that I have available to grab and bend some of these little tiny flaps over. There's just so many of them. One thing that was a particularly interesting challenge is this front piece right here to the bridge section, and it took some delicate work, almost sometimes using the tool to bend parts over, but sometimes using the tool to hold the rest of the thing straight while I use either another tool or my finger to bend parts over, because it's so delicate and it's just so easy to misshape things. And that's one of the things that I dealt with. CodeWiki commented about this front little detail piece is that when you bend all the tabs back, a couple of them don't seem even, and it kind of pushes it out. Come to find out, what the instructions are lacking in this section, and I'm hoping that they will improve that, is once you folded, you've got all these tabs in you got the flat part, all these tabs fold back, fold back, fold back. Well, the two end pieces, once you folded the upper and lower flaps back, that whole end piece flips inward to close out the end. And neither one of us realized that until Fascinations responded that we had our trouble shaping that and everything lined up. We realized what they had done, what we hadn't done, what the instructions don't indicate, is the very tip ends. Once you've bent the two side flaps back, the whole end piece flips over, and those two flaps become part of the top and bottom of the end. I try to show some pictures to kind of indicate what I'm talking about, but that was one of the things that the instructions don't mention that probably a lot of people are going to miss. She'll realize that's what's supposed to go. I ended up fiddling with it after being attached and straightened it out myself. Another thing that I ran into that I've given some feedback on is when it comes to parts 9 and 13, I want to say that they ultimately end up in the back on one of the side stacked upper deck pieces. 9 and 13 seem to be reversed. I clipped out part 9 from where the instructions said it was on the sheet and tried to put it where the instructions said to put it. And 19 is a mostly rectangular part, flat short end, flat top and bottom end. This end has a slight angle to it. And I can't remember which was which, but the angle on the part that I clipped out did not match the angle that was where it was supposed to go. When I clipped out part 13, it did match up with the angle on the side, and I was able to put part 13 where part 9 was supposed to go. Consequently, when it come time to get part 13 and clip it out and put it in its spot, I used part 9 in part 13 and was able to easily put that in place. I could get the parts in the wrong place, kind of twist the tab, and I did, but it didn't feel right, and I pulled it out and double checked it, and that's when I discovered the angles don't match. They're the opposite. And also I want to say with parts 9 and 13, when you attach those tabs, say to twist the tabs, and twisting will work. But I ended up going back a couple of those tabs and folding them over, because in a couple of steps those tabs will kind of be in the way of reaching and twisting or folding another tab. So just to save yourself a slight headache, when you put on parts 9 and 13, just go ahead and fold the tabs in to get the tabs out of the way for a future part. And I'm going to kind of show you my instructions here, because as I was going along and noticing some of these errors, I did scribble on my instructions a little bit. And there were a number of things just in this one area in the first few steps. After getting 9 and 13 attached to the side parts 8 and 12, the pieces 8 and 12. Another thing that CodeWiki kind of pointed out is you've got parts 10 and 14, and neither one of us are exactly sure if we've put those parts on correctly or if we put them on backwards, because the instructions, I think I put them on the way the instructions say, but it's kind of difficult to tell. CodeWiki seems to think that maybe the 360 view or the display model has them the other way around. Later on, as I'm assembling more of it, it seemed like parts 10 and 14 kind of stuck off to one side a little bit too much, and I had to kind of cram a part behind it, so neither one of us are really sure the correct way to put that on, or if it can be flipped backwards. But it's not that great of a concern. However, as you move on through step 3 and you're adding those side pieces of 8 and 13 to part 16, which is kind of the upper part of that deck section, there's a rear tab at the back where that cutout is, kind of back here. There's a tab on either side for either part that I highly recommend you fold that tab backwards, like towards the rear of the ship. And again, the rear is where that cutout is for this towering piece right here. It's actually this middle deck that we're working on, I do believe. And what happens is right in front of that tab, it's kind of hard to see here, but right in front of that tab, just a step later, are parts 17 and 18, and those two parts aren't going to sit quite right if those tabs are bent inwards or forward, because it's going to get in the way of those pieces sitting. So I ended up folding them forward, seeing that, folded them backwards, saves myself a little bit of trouble trying to get that part laid flat. But it's just little things like that right off the start. Those are some of the things that I ran into, but they're not hard to overcome. Now, I haven't received a response back from Fascinations about whether or not those parts are labeled backwards or mixed up backwards, or if somehow I messed up, but CodeWiki seemed to notice the same thing. But we did get some feedback on some other things that we commented on. Another thing, and it's not a big issue, these dome pieces up here, which I believe are the shield generators, because in one of the movies they were trying to take that out to bring the shields down for the bridge, are a little bit flatter than I expected. I expected them to be taller and more rounded, and they're kind of flatter and more oval. And it almost looks like they are not cut at the right angle and don't want to shape properly, but there they are. They do okay. And just look a little bit flatter than I would expect, but they look okay. As we're putting this top piece here together, one of the things you may be able to see here, CodeWiki had issues with this as well, this bottom piece that it sits on is supposed to have a slight angle to it, and this rest of this assembly sits on top. It's a bugger to get that on there. It's really a challenge to get all the tabs in, but in the end you've got some tabs on the back, you've got some tabs on the side, and I think there's a couple of tabs in the middle. But the way the pressure and stress is applied to it, you can see it kind of, the front sits okay on this side because it's connected the way it folds over on this side. This side it's sitting a little off, and at one point I had wedged that corner inside to make it look better, but I can see that over time it's worked itself back out, and that whole front flap is kind of shifted, and I can't get it to not do that. I just can't. I would have liked for them to maybe include an extra tab to sturdy that in place. CodeWiki was able to wedge his in and get it to stay. I wedged mine, the top corner under there, but it's popped back out already. So that's not terrible, but something that I would like to see maybe improve. Something that I don't know. Don't want to knock anybody. I certainly couldn't design anywhere near as complicated a model as this, or any model that you bend and fold and shape. So I really don't know that I can suggest how to fix it. It seems like a tab would do it, but maybe there's more to it than that. But that is one thing that I struggled with, and as you can see, couldn't get quite right. Once you've gotten this upper bridge, upper area completed, you've got the two upper decks put together. The instructions show those coming together, this sliding into that slot, and then you attach it to the rest of the ship. However, and I initially tried to attach them together, but there's just too many tabs. What I ended up doing, putting this taller piece on first and getting its tabs in, and then sliding this section in there and getting those tabs in, which wasn't hard to do. and probably a lot easier than trying to put it all in at one time. But then you go on to building these kind of off-shaped pieces that sit on the side. One here, and then there's one over here, and there's also another piece beside it. But the next pieces in step 11 and 12, you've got one long piece, and then it has 3 rectangular pieces that attach, and those are 39, 40, and 41. The thing that bothered me a little bit, and this is personal to me, is that 39, 40, and 41, they're duplicate parts because they're the same on both sides. They're all colored on the instructions, but they're all colored a shade of green. And 41 is easy for me to tell. That's a very limeish light green, but the other two look almost the same, and I can easily mix those parts up. There's a slight size difference, but again, it's so similar I could mix them up. Fortunately, on the side of parts 38 and 42, they actually have the engraving that matches the part, so that would help me not mix things up. Except the engraving for 40 doesn't exactly match. It seems like they kind of slightly did the engraving, but most of it just doesn't match. It's enough to still get it right, but be a little careful, especially if you have some issues telling shades of colors like I do, that you double check and make sure that at least the other patterns are matching up. At least 39 and 41 are matching, and then you're left with 2 pieces that are going to be the same, are going to go where part 40 goes. Now after you finish doing steps 11 and 12, and then you start attaching these upper pieces, what I was talking about earlier, whereas it kind of shows these two going together, but then it's better to do them separately, and then you add a few panels here and there, and then the next step, which begins at 14, is those 2 side pieces with the boxes kind of cram in under this piece that I'm not sure if I got backwards or not. And you can kind of see on one side it pushes out more than the other. It fits back there, but it just makes me wonder, is it supposed to fit that tight, or did something go wrong? Also in step 14, you're adding in this extra piece here and over here, and it's just one wall piece with a top part on, and it indicates to twist the tabs, which is fine, but I'm not sure why. For me, I folded those over because it made for a neater look. There's no reason to twist them. They don't need to be overly secure. They're just holding a top part on, that's it. So why they indicated the twist, I don't know, but that's kind of an indication of something that continues to happen in this model. There are a number of situations where it indicates to twist the tabs, and I really think it would be better off to fold them. Such as the steps following 14, 15 and 16 has you shaping the guns, and that's no big deal, just follow right along. However, when it comes to step 16, where you're attaching the gun to that rounded base, it indicates to twist the tab. Well, that rounded base is not very tall, and I certainly optioned to fold those tabs over to make sure there was enough room and things sat down properly. The next step in 17, you're adding all the guns you made in 15 and 16 to a rectangular platform, and again it indicates to twist those tabs, and that is a really shallow platform, so I really don't see where it would be a good idea to twist them. I think it'd be a better idea to fold them. Again, step 18 is just a repeat of 17, but for the other side. But there's a number of situations, 14, 16, 17, and 18, where it's indicating twisted tabs, and I really think you should fold those tabs over to make enough room. Another minor detail that I ran into is when it comes to bending down or shaping some of the added on pieces. For instance, step 20, you've got parts 58 and 59. The instructions seem to indicate that all of those side flaps fold over at not quite 90 degrees, something like that. So a little bit more of an obtuse angle. Except on 58 and 59, that one shorter piece that ends up ultimately going against the main structure up here, and I believe here are the 2 pieces right here, here and here. This side piece that goes snug against the rest of it, that one actually seems to bend at a straight 90-degree angle, and that's indicated by the fact that when you fold the other pieces down, the edges line up in such a way that if you fold that inner piece in at a similar obtuse angle, things don't line up. And that seems to be something that also occurs in, I believe, 2 or 3 other spots. Now, the instructions don't actually specifically say what to do with that one back flap. It just kind of shows that it's folded over, so maybe by omission they assume you're going to figure out it's 90 degrees. It's not hard to figure out, especially if you have some experience with these models, that hey, that should be bent a little bit further into a full 90 degrees. A similar thing is repeated, I believe, for 63 and 64. I think they have a longer piece on the inside that's also 90 degrees. And then I believe much later on in 77 and 78, also the inner piece, the part that goes towards the fold, is a straight 90 degrees. Probably because all of these pieces that are folded at 90 degrees, whereas everything else is folded at a slightly wider angle, are all pieces that face towards the center bend of the top or bottom of the ship. So it kind of makes sense that since those pieces are already angled, maybe they don't need to be angled on the side. Now one big boo-boo that both CodeWiki and myself noticed in our individual sets is when you get to part 62. 62 has one corner of it that it looks like the engraving and fold line is actually messed up and not drawn correctly or engraved correctly. It doesn't match up with where the part should be bent over. We pointed this out to Fascinations, and our CodeWiki pointed out, I agreed, mine was the same, but he got to that section before I did, and they have made a note to make a correction on future models. How long that'll take, I'm sure there are probably already a lot printed and out there that have that mistake. It's not hard to overcome. Fold the other pieces around it down, and then you can kind of visually draw a line between the 2 corners, put your maybe some flat nose pliers in the right place and just force it to bend in that area, and it works out. The engraving ends up slightly off, but it's not highly noticeable because it's one of these 2 pieces in here that are kind of facing the inside, so it doesn't really stand out. I think it's this corner, but I'm not sure. Honestly, it's looking at it, it's kind of hard to tell. But that is one of the things that they're going to improve in the future. They appreciate the feedback. There were, I don't know how many sections were remarked that there's a green triangle for a twist where there should be a fold, but they did say, at least in one of the sections, that they were going to update that in future instructions. One of the reasons I put off making this video was because I was trying to see if those, at least the online instructions, were updated, but as of this morning, when I checked, they still hadn't updated. But hopefully that will come to be soon. In the meantime, you have me in these videos to kind of say, hey, be careful of that. Got the top and bottom done. Those are most of the highlights from where you would run into trouble. Everything else is going to be pretty straightforward, especially if you're going to do something like this. This is an advanced model. Hopefully you have some experience under your belt. Anything else you're probably going to be able to see and overcome fairly easily if you have some experience with these models. So I'm not going to go over every detail. I will move to the back thrusters and just comment that with these smaller ones, there is a piece that wraps around another piece, and you have to hold that piece in place while you wrap the other parts around it. Let me find the actual part numbers here. Parts 85 wrap around part 86, and you do that 4 times. And initially I tried to give 85 a basic shape using my cone shaping tools. The idea of opening it up just enough to slide 86 into place and then close it back around it. It didn't really work because it's such a tight wrap or tight angle. What I ended up having to do was almost flatten it out completely and just put 86 in one tab, put one of the tabs in its slot, twist it, wrap the other around and over the other tab, twist or fold it, and then connect the 2 ends of 85 and shape it. It was a little bit cumbersome doing it that way, but overall it was easier and worked out better than trying to give it a basic shape, open it up and sticking the part in, because really I wasn't able to successfully do it that way. And then you got 87 that just curves and sticks in the middle. Really easy to do. The 4 different parts in step 28, it's attached to, 2 of them attach to one part in 29. The other 2 attach to a similar but opposite part in 30, and it's pretty straightforward from there. 31, I ended up taking 31 in 2 steps because it was kind of complicated and I didn't want to mix up parts. But that one I did use cone shaping tools, and it just went together fairly easily, so no big deal. Then you get to step 32, where you're putting all the cones on. One of the things that I did before I started attaching all the thruster cones to this piece, because it's still flat, is I went ahead and gave it a little bit of a fold to kind of break that seam, because I didn't want all those thrusters in there and to fight with it and then knock something out of whack. So I started but didn't finish bending it into shape, and then attach the thrusters and then finish bending into shape. And it's just something that I like to do in what I perceive to be a delicate area, rather than waiting to where I have little or no room to grab pieces and mess with stuff to try and break that fold, because sometimes stuff will be really stiff until you get it start it bending, and then it becomes easier to bend. And then probably the hardest part of this build is right at the very end, and I'm not talking about the stand. The stand is a little challenging to get the tabs folded over because it's so little structure to sturdy it, but you can lightly twist some tabs until you get enough of it together and go back. Stand's not a big deal. It is trying to get this back section on to the ship, and if you look carefully you can kind of see this piece is not completely straight. There's a slight curve to it, because after you've assembled all this top part, it kind of pushes it into a sharper angle than it needs to be to match up with this. CodeWiki ran into the same issue, where it was a struggle to kind of flatten the top back out a little bit and get the two tabs lined up, to the point where he commented it was like he was going to break the tabs off trying to get them in. I managed to get it with a lot of flexing, finally got it in there. The bottom attach is much simpler because it can still be flexed, because it's not being forced into a different shape by the massive amount of parts that are on top. And then once you've gotten those 4 tabs in line, that's a bit of a struggle. These last 2 pieces on either side are just a pain, and the ones in the corner, the angles don't seem to match up. It doesn't make sense that it goes in there the way it does, but I just went ahead and put one tab in and twisted it, put the bottom on, pushed the tab where it went, and it seems to work out okay. It looks a little odd, or at least it looked really odd before. It looks a little odd now, but it works. But these last 2 pieces, parts 103, are just a pain. They're just an absolute pain, and I find myself wondering if maybe the angle doesn't need to be folded in as much at top. I'm not sure. It was just, you have to put it in last. Everything else is assembled, so you kind of have to squish it too far, get one side in. I ended up holding the part upside down and just letting gravity hold it there while I grabbed and twisted the tabs, flipping it over, and then wrestling to get the other part into its tabs and attaching it. A lot of stuff, once you attach the top and bottom together, a lot of the tabs I was able to easily fold over. When I was attaching the rear thruster section, I twisted the tabs, but I was able to go back and fold them over. When it come to these last pieces, I didn't try to untwist the tabs and fold them over. I just left them the way they were, because I was terrified they would fall out and I'd go through that fight again, and I just didn't wanna. And I'll be honest, once I got to the end of this build, the last few steps are very frustrating, and it just flat made me angry. I was happy to get the model done and didn't have a lot of nice things to say about it. Put the model down, and it was probably a half hour later that I was feeling great about it again. And that's just something you sometimes go through with these models, where you get difficult connections and difficult parts, and you think in your head, why do they design it like this? You think they could find a better way. It's just difficult. You're right, it is difficult. This is a delicate little metal model with tons of tiny little parts and amazing amount of detail, and it's something you gotta work for. And once I've had some time to calm down and get past that was really frustrating part, to the part where, wow, this is really amazing, and now I have this in my collection, and I did that, the frustration becomes a lot less on the surface and not that big a deal. And I certainly went through that process myself. Would I have liked for a few of the things to fit together better than they did? Certainly. But in the end, I am so thrilled to have this amazing model, and the new trend of having stands that aren't attached, I'm okay with that. Looks like that's got a weird angle to it. I will say the one complaint about this is I rather wish it was a little bit wider so that it fit around that dome better. Doesn't really snugly fit anywhere good under here, except for towards the front, but honestly this far forward it's too back heavy. So it needs to be, the balancing point is right around those domes. So I kind of wish it was a little bit wider. I could stretch it open a little bit wider, but I don't want to mess with it. It is nice, however, that I can pick this thing up, and as per a conversation I recently had on Reddit, I can fly it around and go zoom. So that's pretty cool. And I believe the 3 new ships that just came out also have that feature where they aren't attached to the stand and you can zoom them around. So wonderful. Love the detail. I really love the blue and the thrusters. That is an excellent touch. Fascinations. I love that you have some guns on here. The guns remind me of the battleships that I've made recently. You've got the guns here. There's a couple of guns on the bottom, which I put on backwards because in the drawing, at a quick glance, I thought the back piece that stuck out was the barrel, because there's the barrel, apparently, and there's a piece on the back, which is similar to a barrel, and I glanced at it wrong, put them on backwards, double-checked myself, and went, oh, that's wrong, but you know what? I'm not taking it apart. I don't care. They're just maybe it's some sort of attack formation. There's a couple of tiny little things here. I'm not sure if they're guns or not. And there's some guns here and on the opposite side. So there's actually quite a few tiny little guns on here. Loads and loads and loads and loads of wonderful but tiny detail that I'm just ecstatic about. And it is a nice, sizable model. Is it frustrating to put together? Sure. It is frustrating. It's very challenging. It is not completely frustrating. There's a lot of just take your time, really simple. This will be great. Folding and shaping and putting things together. Just a few very frustrating parts and a few things in the instructions that can stand to be improved. But they're working on it. Oh yeah, I forgot that gun right there. Check that out. Really, really amazing. Well, like I said, I've already gotten some feedback. CodeWookie and I both have gotten some feedback on some of the things that we found with the twisted tabs. It really should be folded, with the fold line being offset and needing to be corrected, and there's a couple other things I'm still waiting to hear back from. I kind of delayed putting this video out because I was wanting to get a little bit more feedback, but it's been a while and it's time to go ahead and record it and do it and put it out there. So if you get your model and you find some of the same problems, at least either with this review video, or if you want to watch my build videos, there's a 3-parter. There's information in there, or maybe you'll get one of the later models that has been improved and you'll have an easier time than me, and that'll be great. I do want to take a moment to thank Fascinations for sending me this wonderful model to build and review. It was sent to me. I didn't have to purchase it. I got very lucky. Sent it to me with the understanding that I would give them an honest review within a certain amount of time, of course, and that's what I've done. I, being a Star Wars, Star Trek, and just general sci-fi ship fan, am just beyond thrilled to have this model in my collection. And I'm going to have to 3D print some risers to go on my shelves behind me so that it can sit above some other things. And oh man, the pictures that I would love to set up and take if I have the time. This is such a beautiful, beautiful model. I will not forget the frustrations, but they don't seem to be that big a deal anymore. And at the end of my videos, I do like to ask myself the question, if I had this to build over again, what would I do differently? And it's pretty easy to see. There are a number of small details that I've already commented on that if I knew then what I know now, I could have done them easier. One of the ones that stands out is when I was commenting on these smaller rear thrusters, just not wasting my time trying to shape them with the cone shaping tool. There's a lot of I cut out in the video where I fought with that and tried to make that work. I tried a little too hard and gave up, and I just, going back, I wish knowing what I know now, I just would have bothered and just folded them the correct way and probably saved myself a little headache and a little bit of trouble. The other thing is maybe making more of an effort as I'm building all the pieces of this top section to kind of keep it flexed out a little bit flatter rather than letting it push itself down into the angle that it did. Now that I know that it needs to not be that pushed down, perhaps as I went along building it, I could have fought against that and kept things more flexed out and ended up with an easier to attach rear thruster section. One other thing is maybe take a little time to take a few more pictures of some of the things that I found so that I can easier explain to Fascinations what I was showing, because there was some back and forth between the one part about 9 and 13 being backwards. I think at one point they thought the instructions were drawn backwards, and they updated the drawing. And it's like, well, no, it's not. To me, that wasn't really the issue. The issue was that the part just physically didn't fit where it said it fit. So, not that that's a big deal, but just for me, wanting to give feedback to make a better model for everybody. And this is no insult to anybody. Fascination spent a lot of time working on this model. It seemed to take forever for it to come out because they weren't just holding on to it. They were going back over it and redesigning it and trying to improve it and doing the best that they could. And I think they've done a wonderful job. And the few mistakes that have slipped by, you know, you look at something over and over again and it's easy to miss stuff. And there's so much to this, I can see how they would miss stuff. And as far as the one fold line, I don't know what's the cause of that. That could have been a manufacturing error. I don't know. But overall, they've done a wonderful job, put a lot of detail, and it's an absolutely amazing model. Sure, it's got a few little flaws, but don't we all? I'll leave it at that. As always, I do want to thank Fascinations for sending me this model for me to review. I want to thank my Patreon supporters for supporting this channel so that I can continue to take the time and make these videos and buy more models and the equipment I need to keep making these build videos, review videos, and news videos, and keep them coming. And I do want to thank you for watching, for your feedback. Your feedback helps me to do better in the future. Thank you for watching, and keep on keeping on.